It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. Craig, shut up. Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump.
So welcome to another Reality Check with Craig Price. This week we have project management guru Gina Abudi joining us. She's going to talk to us not only about project management, but how you can apply some of these processes that we often think of as only for corporations and how we can apply those to smaller businesses. You know, I've done a lot of work with Project Management Institute, the PMI, and I'm always surprised at how many project managers there are out in the world, and then how varied their individual jobs are. You know, they do all kinds of things that you wouldn't even expect to that under the umbrella of project management. And for many in the outside world, project managers are these vague, mysterious titles. But the one thing I've learned over the years from project managers is they do all share one quality, and that is adaptability. I mean, you're working with all kinds of different people in lots of different departments, and you're dealing with different vendors and different specialties, and you are responsible for all of them. And then on top of that, you don't get to choose really who you're working with or who you'll be working for you or the vendors. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but the job is you have to fit into the mold of the project much more than catering the project to your strengths. So you have to adapt to the project at all times. If you try to adapt it to you, you end up causing more problems. So you have to be really adaptable, and it can be daunting at times. And so I certainly respect project managers and all that they do, because it's really a large undertaking. You really got to be able to spin a lot of plates. But before we get to Gina, let me remind you to please, if you can, leave a review on iTunes. It really helps out. And also feel free to follow along on Twitter. We are at Reality Check Pod. Podcast would be too long. So at Reality Check Pod. Let people know about us if you can, because whatever happened last week, I don't know. We had a huge influx of listeners last week, and I'm not sure why, but we had more people listen to us in a 3-day period than almost all of February. So I really appreciate anybody who takes the time out to listen. So hopefully we can keep those numbers up. We can get more people listening, because the numbers keep going, and I see each week that we get more and more listeners. Last week was a deluge, but I really appreciate anyone who takes time out to listen to us. Also, I am looking for guests. So if you know someone with an interesting background or has an interesting expertise, email me at craig@speakercraigprice.com. I would appreciate that. We've got the Facebook page. We've got a Yahoo channel. You name it, we're on it. So follow us however you see fit, whatever's easiest for you. But enough of that. I get tired of the promotion part. Let's get right to our guest, Gina Abudi. You've got the empowering global leaders is going to be your theme. How did you pick that one?
Based on it's actually our theme for everything we're doing at the Mass Bay chapter this year.
Yeah, it's a year theme, and then you put it towards the Professional Development Day.
Yes, exactly. But this is actually going to be our theme going forward. So we just came up with this is what we do, sort of our tagline for the chapter. And we wanted to have our first Professional Development Day under this new theme or tagline to be focused in the same direction.
And so not just the development day, but every chapter meeting this year and then maybe the next, or just forever going forward, is going to kind of be wrapped around that, or is it just?
Yes. Yep. It's going to be wrapped around that. And we do a combination of both technical skills for project managers, but also a lot around management and leadership skills for project managers, sort of those critical or soft skills.
Oh, sure. They bring me in all the time. PMI Project Management Institute brings me in all the time for that.
Exactly. And it's, and it's the focus for a lot of our members, they're sort of beyond needing the technical skills. Although we do support, we have over 2,300 members, so we do support a variety of project managers at a variety of levels. But many of them are looking for what is our next step? Where are we going from here? And where we're going is into leadership roles. And how do we do that effectively? So that's why that is going to be our focus.
And for some people, I don't know if they know the difference between a regular manager per se and a project manager, because there's been people who've been project managers for 30 years at the same company. And because I always thought, in my mind, I think of a project manager is they've got a beginning and an end. That's the project. But
Exactly.
But for these people who've been in the same job, their title is project manager from, they've been in that position 15, 20 years with the same company. How now all of a sudden that doesn't make sense because there is no timeline per se. So what would you see the difference between that and a project manager?
I see as a manager as someone who might be managing a department or a group of people, managing a product or a service for a company, as opposed to a project manager who, even if he or she is in the same organization for a number of years, is focused on managing a particular launch of products, launches of services within the organization, helping with operations within the organization, but operations as they're involved in projects. So maybe launch of a new customer relationship management database or a financial planning system, or even an office move or an office relocation. So a project manager within an organization is likely involved in managing a number of different initiatives. Once they're launched and that part is done, they get turned over to possibly a manager to manage.
So it's still timeline driven to some degree.
It is.
But it's just they are constantly going from small project to small project in company.
Yes, exactly.
And for those of you who don't know, I'm here with Gina Abudi, who is the president till 2013, I believe, of the PMI chapter of Mass Bay.
Correct.
And what does that cover, Mass Bay? Because I'm assuming just Boston, but how far west do you go until the Worcester people get upset?
Yeah, no, we actually go throughout Boston and the surrounding areas. We do go into Westboro area, Southboro, up towards Worcester area. We do have members who are members of both chapters.
Okay.
So.
Well, I know they like to have their little territories.
Yes, yes.
And project managers, the one thing I do like about them is they're very organized and detail-oriented. So there is this is exactly this dividing line at the Berkshire Mountains is where West Massachusetts is like. So I wanted to give an idea that this is, Boston's not a small town.
No.
And the outlying areas have several large. So this is a pretty large chapter. How many people are in your chapter?
Over 2,300. We're actually approaching 2,400.
And that is a massive amount.
Yes.
How do you do meetings? Do you do one place, or do you do 3 or 4 in different places?
No. We do a variety of different opportunities for our members to get together, but our meetings are held in different areas throughout Boston and surrounding areas to accommodate our members. So we're never in just one location. And then in addition, we have roundtables, which are located in different geographical locations throughout Boston, like Cambridge, Waltham, Boston, the Northwest area, specifically in order to enable people who are in that specific area to get together with other members. And they do networking together, bring in a speaker to talk at their breakfast meetings.
Which I have been, not at Mass Bay, but that's what I do. I do a lot of PMI. They've been very, very good to me. So they haul me in, and that's why I was thinking 2,400 members. There's got to be, in any given month, there has to be at least more than one meeting because you couldn't possibly. You'd have to get the Fleet Center to have everybody come in. We're going to have a brunch. We're going to have a brunch with 2,300 members.
Yeah. Well, like with most of the chapters, we get probably a chapter meeting has on average maybe 180 to 225 attendees. So not all, but we are moving to doing a lot more with webinars, some virtual meetings, which we don't do currently, but we're looking at that for probably the next program year.
Now, we all know that, like I said, management is a key, but one of the things that you really want people to know about is how project management can be of value to smaller businesses, because we all know project managers. We think of Siemens, we think of these big, huge companies that where they need a project manager because there's hundreds of people that they have to coordinate in a short amount of time. But you think there's inherent value for smaller businesses as well.
There is. And it doesn't have to be a matter of hiring or bringing on board people who are certified project managers. I like to look at it more as of taking a project management approach to how the work gets done in the business, right? So if you take a project management approach to how you develop your marketing plan, how you launch your products or services, you put processes in place and put best practices around how you do that work, which enables for much more efficiency. So that's how I like to look at it.
And where do we get those resources? Because I hear best practices all the time in almost every industry, and it's just a matter of finding those out, especially if you're in a small business. Say you're in a business with 20, 25 people. That includes yourself. That's a small business.
Yes.
They may not have project management experience. They may have management experience, but they may not have project management experience. So what of the project management processes, how do you get that best practice? Where do you find that out?
I actually work with a number of small businesses to help them develop a best practice and processes around project management. And I actually have a number of articles on my blog relevant to that just tells you how to take a project management approach to how you do the business. And it doesn't have to be technical. So often we think of project management and we think of the Project Management Institute and the certification around project management and the technical aspects. And I try to get people away from thinking about the technical aspects. And it's just an approach to how you get the job done, how you plan for what needs to get done. That's the way I want them to look at it.
Okay, and so what are the first couple steps that if you, like I said, if you don't have a project management background, you don't really know how to apply any of that because you don't know the process. Well, give me the first two steps of a project management approach to, let's say, a marketing campaign.
I ask them to sit down and I have a bunch of very simple templates I use to help them kind of formalize their thoughts around it and think about what is the objective of, let's say, the marketing campaign. What do we want to accomplish by having the marketing campaign? Think about who needs to be involved in the initiative. Think about the tasks involved in developing and launching the marketing campaign. Think about how we're going to measure the success of it. Think about what we need to accomplish to get it done. So I want them to think through all of that, starting with what is the reason for doing it in the first place. And that enables us to kind of get our hands around what is the scope of it. What is the scope of this particular project?
And that scope thing, I know that in a lot of project management situations, that scope, especially if you're, like, say, you're a consultant working for another person, and then you start getting a plan and there's a scope, and things start going outside of the scope. It often can get out of control rather quickly. So for someone who is working with who is a consultant, who is working with somebody, and you sit down and you start making that scope out. What is the scope of the project? How do you maintain, if the client wants to start to, bleed outside that scope?
When I work with my clients, the process we use is sort of define it, plan it, implement it, and close and lessons learned. So it's a very simple process we follow. And with the scope, one of the things we do is we plan for a change management process. So anything that is outside of the objectives of the project, and I make sure that when we develop the objectives, they're very clear. If someone reads an objective, they understand exactly what we're trying to accomplish. There's no ambiguity there, and we can measure against that objective. If anything has to be changed and it is outside those objectives and is not specifically one of those objectives we've defined for the project, we go through a very simple change management process where we look at what are we looking to change? What is the description of the change? Why do we need this change? What is the impact on the project if we don't do this change? So it enables me to help my clients understand if someone gives you a change, let's not just jump on doing it. Let's understand how important is it really to do. What is the impact if we don't do it? And then we look at what is the impact of that change on the project. And I try to enforce that regardless of how small the change might seem. Even if you say, look, the change is only going to take me 10 minutes to do. We'll just do it. Enough of those 10-minute changes will add up and really derail your project. So we want to really have a process in place that says, let's really evaluate the change. Let's find out the impact of the change on the scope of the project, the cost of the project, the timeline, the resources, all the aspects of the project we have to worry about, and determine if it's an appropriate change to move forward with now. And if we do decide to move forward, what is that impact? And if we don't move forward, does it make sense for a phase 2 of the project or another project overall? Or does it not even meet the objectives of what we were ttrying to accomplish in the first place?
And I think a lot of the times that one of the key things that gets overlooked in that process of what's going to happen, what could go, it's people don't put in risk management. They don't put in the risk of what's going on. And one of the things I tell project managers when I speak to them is that you want to do the risk management because often it'll allow you to kind of not pad, because that sounds wrong, but it allows to go to your shareholders and talk to them and say, look, this bad thing, this risk could happen. We need to have a little bit more budget for specifically this risk.
Yes.
So this is a good way not to pad your budget, but it really is. It's emergency funding of, inflating, getting your budget slightly larger so you have that wiggle room.
Correct. And part of the plan process that we go through in our processes, our process for managing projects is to make sure that we do some risk management planning and understanding what our risks are. And I say to my clients, there are some risks that you can pretty much count on for every project. And I'll give you an example, right? If I'm working with a client and they say, this is the project that we need to accomplish, this is the budget for the project, and this is the timeline when I need it done in. Immediately for me, budget and timeline are risks. And the reason why is I don't know enough about the project yet. I don't know enough. I'm not saying it's impossible to meet that budget or to meet that timeline. I'm just saying until I learn more and meet with the sponsor and key stakeholders, I don't know enough to say that those aren't risks. So those are immediate risks to a project for me. And one of the things I say, because where people get really hung up, I found, on managing projects, especially people who are not professional project managers, is the scheduling of the project. And when you think about it, it can be a little bit overwhelming to people because you think about all the major tasks or activities that are involved in something you're trying to accomplish. And it's hard to get your head around it.
Especially if you've never done it. I mean, it's
Exactly.
hard to think about, well, we're going to get this done in 3 weeks. Where'd that number come from?
Yes.
Because
Yep.
I've worked at places where they made arbitrary sales figures, which is one crazy thing, where you have to make this much money at this amount of time, which is like, where did you get that number from?
Exactly.
And then there's also, we have to do something in a certain amount of time. And it's like, well, where have you done this in the past? And they're like, oh, no, we've never done this. So it's going to take 2 weeks and then they're shocked when it takes 4 or 5.
Yep. And one of the things I say to people when I'm working with them and how to better manage their projects is don't get panicked or hung up on the timeline immediately. After we develop the schedule, and I go through a process on how to effectively develop a schedule so it's not so overwhelming, I said compare what you come up with to the timeline. And I do a little bit, without going through the entire process, I do a little bit then of fine-tuning, tightening up the schedule a little bit, and then I compare to see if I've met the timeline I've been giving. And if I haven't met the timeline, it gives me a little bit more data to have the conversation with the sponsor and the stakeholder about the project. I will tell you, in 20 plus years of managing projects, I can count on one hand and not even all 5 fingers the number of times someone said to me, how much time do you need for that project? Usually they give me a timeline. But I have found in that same amount of time, in 20 years, that I have been very successful in arguing or negotiating.
I like that.
Why
Arguing
I need
is
more time.
I like the word arguing because
Yes.
you can tell you're from the Northeast because you're not afraid to say that because that's what it is.
It is. That's exactly what it is.
It's fighting for your side, and sometimes that leads to arguments.
Yes, and that's okay. That's okay as long as they're done well and professionally.
Yeah, that's right. As long as you don't get personal
Exactly.
and don't get crude, which
That's
can
right.
often can get kind of unruly sometimes. But yeah, you got to fight sometimes for, especially you're basically fighting ignorance.
Yes.
They don't know how much time it is, and so I do this a lot with technology. You know, people watch TV and they watch these science fiction shows, or they watch, perfect example, they watch a spy movie, and they always have some satellite that can lock in on the license plate
Yes.
and read it clearly,
Yes.
and that's almost physically impossible just because of angles.
Yes.
You know, but people think that can actually happen. And so when they go, we need you to do something, and we need you to create this thing in Photoshop, or we need you to do this, it should only take you a day or 2. It's like, you have no idea. Put the website up. It should take a week.
Yes.
And it's like you don't know because you think technology is actually better than it actually is.
Yeah. And I always say that, don't take it personally. It's because people they don't understand, but you can educate. You have to, as a project manager, you have got to educate the sponsors and the key stakeholders as to why you need the time you need or what is really involved. And the education takes time, but I will tell you, everyone I've set out to educate over time has, let's say, seen my way. They've seen the benefits. They understand it.
That has nothing to do with the fact that you're from New Jersey and you have people who can, set people straight.
Exactly. Nothing to do with that at all.
I got an Uncle Sal. He can set people straight.
Yes. My way or the highway. Just do it.
And it really is about, if you can get all these things done in the planning process ahead of time, it'll save you a lot more headaches down the road.
Yes, and it's helping people to understand, especially for some organizations. For smaller organizations, it's a little bit easier to explain to them and to convince them that it's okay to spend time in the planning. It makes the down the road part go much smoother. In larger organizations, when I work with larger organizations that have been doing this for a while, the minute you start talking about planning or socializing, I'm also a big one for socializing projects. But the minute you start talking about doing that, I immediately get, whoa, are you doing any work? Because that's not work. Well, it is work, and it's helping them understand why it's work and the value in doing that beforehand and how it makes for a much more effective and efficient project down the road. Also
builds trust.
Yes.
So that way they don't micromanage as much.
Exactly. That's key.
I feel like I can give this to Gina because I've talked to her and she's not an idiot. She's very smart, and I know she's been doing this a long time. And quite frankly, anybody's experience when they walk in the door is kind of there, but it's not really until they can actually see you do it.
That's right. Right.
So you can I've been here for 30 years. That doesn't mean anything until they see that 30 years of experience shine through. So
that's right.
These socializing events, I do think that in a lot of large companies, they don't recognize the fact that these people have to get along. You want to try to eliminate politics as quickly as possible, and you want everybody on the page. And the best way to do that is just to get them to sit down and talk to each other for a little bit and know them as human beings and not just cogs in a machine.
Yep, exactly.
And so now I do get from time to time, and I post when people come on, I post them, hey, we got a project manager coming on. I said we got a PMI president. So that really got some people on Twitter. And I got a question from New Zealand.
Okay.
And they wanted to know, what are the top 3 values of a project manager? So if you were going to hire a project manager, what are the top 3 values that you want to see in them?
I want to see an individual who is an outgoing person, because one of the things that a project manager who's effective brings into the organization is a perspective of the entire business. So one of the things I look for in project managers, and I expect project managers to have, is the ability to effectively build very strong working relationships throughout the organization. Because that perspective of an entire business helps to get things done. Also, somebody who brings in organizational and process. They're very process-oriented, but not so process-oriented that they can't be flexible within the process.
Yeah, because sometimes those 2 values that you just said are, in personality-wise, are an exact opposites.
Yes. It is a challenge.
The outgoing person has no organizational skills, which is why salespeople cannot fill out paperwork, but they can make all the money.
There you go.
And then you got the technical people who would rather spend time in their little fluorescent lit cubby holes, but they get all their work done. They know exactly where everything is, and there's so much organization. Nary do the 2 meet.
Yes. And it is, but those are some of the best. And, people who can take a strategic approach, who can look at and want to look at projects from the perspective of where does it fit into the organization as a whole? Because one of the areas where I find project managers fail is they get a project and they don't really take the time to understand, what is the business case for this project? Where does it fit into the organization? What is the importance of it? And if you don't have that as a project manager, you cannot communicate that to the people on the team. If they don't have that perspective on the team, your team members, you don't really get their full engagement and commitment in the project, because they can't.
No, and
yes.
So is there a way that you can, because like I said, a lot of project managers and we've talked about this before we went on the podcast, that a lot of them are very technical oriented. In fact, you've also prefaced that early on it doesn't always have to be so technical. How can you get some of those softer skills instilled in some of the quality organizational people you have that are good project managers when it comes to getting timelines, getting schedules together, moving the pieces around? But sometimes, moving those pieces around can chip and break pieces for people who are not delicate. So what is one of the ways you can get these technical project managers to be more social?
Yep. They have to see, frankly, they can be taught to be more social. You can get them in that direction, although there are people who argue that you can't teach those skills, and I disagree with that. They have to be wanting to go in that direction, though. I mean, I know some project managers who are very technical project managers. They will probably never lead very strategic projects within an organization, and they're not ever, in the people I know, the face of the project because they don't have that ability to build relationships. Well, I don't think it's a matter of not having that ability. They don't want to build. They don't want that ability. But if you want to really succeed as a project manager and eventually make it into a leadership role, you need that ability. You need that perspective of the business.
And like I said, is there something that they can do, that a little trick that they can do? Because I know I believe you can teach it. I think it's hard for them to perfect it. But it is definitely something that they can, at a manageable rate, use so it doesn't hinder them.
You can simply start by building relationships, and here's how you do it. I say to project managers, I want to get there. How do I build relationships? What do I do? As a project manager, visit each of the departments in the organization or the business units in the organization in which you work and say, hey, what do you guys have going on? What are some of your challenges? What are you working on? I'd love to know. Meet the manager of that department for coffee. Go out to lunch with them. Get to know the people. This does a couple things. It gives you a perspective of the business. It starts to bring out sort of your people side. And you know what else it does? When you need to work with members from that department on a team, and as we know, for most project managers, the people on the team don't report directly to you, so you can't tell them what to do. Although I'd argue you can't tell people what to do even if they do report to you.
Right.
Yeah. But when you build those relationships, you get much more commitment from your team. I say to them, when you're working on a project, do what I separate kicking off the project from kicking off the project team. And what I mean by that is before we kick off the project, I want to have the team together in a room, and I want to get to know each other. Let's develop a relationship. Let's talk about things. Let's not just talk about the project. Let's get to know each other on a personal level.
So some of these technical project managers are going to need to get out of their comfort zone to some degree and just bite the bullet and go knock on doors or pick up phone calls or send emails to set up times to go to interact face to face.
Yep. I tell people, when people say to me, they see me as a very technical person in the organization, I would love to get on a leadership track and I don't know how I'm going to get there. And I say, honestly, unless you start understanding the people side and you start develop relationships, you're not going to get there. You're holding yourself back, and you don't need to hold yourself back.
Now, I do know that you did come out with a book recently. It's a dummies book. I'm sorry, it's a complete idiot's guide.
Yes.
So I don't believe they're complete idiots because they probably wouldn't go to the library or go to a bookstore and buy this because they're so a somewhat medium-sized complete idiot. Maybe a slow moron's guide to best practices for small businesses.
Yes.
And because I want to get back on that best practices thing that we started off with, because I do think that's the hardest thing for people to, especially if you're in a small business and you're kind of in your own little world. You've got you and your 15, 20 people working together, and you may not have connections as far as people in your business. As far as if you run a florist shop, you may only know one or two other florists.
Yes.
So best practices is kind of a myth. It's not a myth, but it's kind of this legendary thing that's out there.
I know. Yeah, best practices are hard for people to get their hands around. And I always say, don't overcomplicate it. Best practices is just a method that you use to do a better job of what you need to do, frankly. And they could be anything. For some of my clients I work with, some best practices around how they manage projects is taking a more team-based approach to solving problems on the project or to how they manage changes. That could be a best practice. And best practices, I do see a lot of companies who take a best practice wholesale from a competitor or from an industry and use it themselves, and you can't do that. Best practices have to be tailored for your particular business.
Well, yeah, because their best practice may not be your best practice, especially if it relies on somebody with a skill that nobody has in your particular organization.
That's right. And best practices are not something that, okay, I have a best practice, it's never going to change. They're changing because your business is changing. As your business changes, your best practices have to be looked at and change. You have to tweak them year after year just to make sure they're still being effective. But, there are things around, how you manage the people, how you provide the people professional development in your organization, how you manufacture your new products or create new services, how you interact with your customers. Those are all best practices.
And it's just a matter of documentation.
Yes,
you got to document it because I think a lot of people do things the best way, but they probably couldn't explain it to somebody because they've just never taken the time to sit down and think about it.
Exactly. That's right.
I mean, I did IT, and so years and years ago, I couldn't do IT now. I'm an idiot. I can barely run my laptop now, but 15 years ago when it wasn't nearly as complicated, it was very difficult for me to explain best practices over a phone. If someone called me and said, Craig, I got this issue, can you help me out with it? I couldn't go, well, sure, do this, this, and this. I would have to go there and do it and go, this is how you do it, boom, 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 and then I'll walk off because in my mind it's not written down, it's not explainable very well, but I can do it very quickly and rapidly.
Yes.
So is there a little trick that we can do to start logging some of these best practices down?
Yeah, and we're in the middle of doing this with our chapter actually, where we're just doing a brain dump from people's head. So talk to me about the processes and the procedure you use to get the work done.
And that will be so much easier when we're all cyborgs. We can just power dump just into that, and then we'll let somebody else, an analyst, sort it all out.
And that's probably not so far away, is it?
It's not. It's too far away right now. I wish someone could plug into my brain and just download stuff. But
I know.
It's basically just kind of getting everybody in the room. So get everybody once a month, once a quarter. How often you want to get together with everybody and start dumping?
I get, if I'm initially trying to put those processes out there, and what's funny is I've been just talking to a client the other day, and they're looking for a better way to get their projects done because they have a lot of hiccups and it's a lot of dead bodies in the wake, and it's just killing people when they have to work on a project. So I said to them, well, let's talk about some of the processes you have in place. And he says to me, oh, we have no processes at all. I said, oh, you have processes. If you didn't, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Your door would be shut. You wouldn't be accomplishing anything. The processes are there. In most cases, in all cases, they're there. They're just in people's heads. And the way I start with them when we need to get them mapped out is we sort of develop a framework for how we should map them out. It might be a template people use, whatever's easier for them. And then I usually meet with people in small groups to do it, just to get them started. And that usually helps. For some people, they really can't explain to me. But if people are doing a particular task within an organization, I will say, let me watch you do that task. And what I want you to do is not do the task the way you might have been taught or told to do it, but the way you do it today. Because sometimes I feel people have been taught to do something and they found better ways of doing it. But if you're trying to watch them or you ask them, they hide those better ways because it's not what they should be doing. I want to see those better ways because that's the way it has to be done.
I know you do a lot of consulting. You've been talking about working with all your clients. And where can people find you if they want to look? If they live in the Northeast, because I know you'll do stuff by Skype, you'll do stuff over the phone, but
Oh, I travel actually. My business is global.
Okay, well there you go. So where in the world can they find you?
You can certainly find me on LinkedIn by just searching for Gina Abudi. You can find me via my blog, Gina Abudi, abudi.com, or via my website, abudiconsulting.com. Well,
Gina, I certainly appreciate your help with the podcast and coming on here and explaining some of the more fundamental things of project management, it can be a little bit mysterious for even people in project management.
This is true. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
So thank you very much, and let's go out and start making some of these processes work.
Exactly. Thank you.
Once again, thanks Gina Abudi for joining me, and if you've listened this far, you must be a project manager, so let me just let you know that I will be at the Rochester PMI Professional Development Day on May 24th. There's that for you. Also, once again, feel free to email me guest suggestions at craig@speakercraigprice.com, or just shoot me questions, or just say hello, or I'll email you back. I promise. See you next week.